For decades, we have looked at Göbekli Tepe and seen the beginning. We call it the 0 point in time. The birthplace of religion, the dawn of civilization, a cathedral built by hunter-gatherers 12,000 years ago. We look at the T-shaped pillars and the carved predators, and we see humanity's first attempt to reach toward the heavens. But we were looking in the wrong direction. While the world focused on what was built upward, a small team of senior archaeologists began to obsess over what was built inward. They noticed discrepancies in the site's layout, voids in the bedrock that didn't match the geology. They suspected that the famous enclosures weren't just temples, but lids covering something else. Recently, they stopped guessing and started scanning. And what they found beneath the limestone suggests that civilization didn't just begin with worship. It began with containment. The suspicion began with the silence. For years, veteran researchers walked the plateau, troubled by the negative spaces, sections of the mound that had been studiously avoided during previous excavations. The official record stated these areas were empty, but the geology suggested otherwise. The team operated quietly. Digging at a heritage site of this magnitude requires years of bureaucracy, so they opted for non-invasive warfare, ground-penetrating radar, and subsurface resistivity imaging. They weren't looking for ruins. They were looking for anomalies in the density of the earth. They concentrated their sensors on the periphery, away from the famous stone circles, near the jagged edge of the bedrock. At first, the data returned only noise-solid, impenetrable limestone. But then, the signal dropped. It wasn't a crack. Geological faults are jagged. They meander. This void had geometry. The readings indicated a hollow space with defined vertical boundaries, sitting well below the surface but too high to be a natural cave system. The data implied a paradox. A void existed where the rock should have been solid, yet there was no visible entrance on the surface. To verify the findings, the team calibrated for depth and density. The results were consistent. A chamber existed beneath the feet of the tourists and the excavation teams, hidden for millennia. But unlike the great circles meant to be seen from miles away, this space was designed to be invisible. When the physical excavation finally breached the soil, the archaeologists realized why the scans had been so confusing. They hadn't just found a buried room, they had found a crime scene that had been tampered with. The entrance had not collapsed naturally, it had been erased. Blocking the narrow opening cut into the bedrock was a plug of dense black material. It stood out violently against the pale local limestone. It wasn't soil and it wasn't debris. Laboratory analysis of the samples revealed a sophisticated composite, bitumen, ash, and organic binding agents. This was prehistoric concrete, engineered to be watertight, airtight, and time-resistant. The implications were chilling. You don't use this kind of material to close a door. You use it to seal a vessel. The builders hadn't just walked away. They had meticulously ensured that once this space was closed, it would never be opened again. The team was no longer excavating a temple. They were breaching a quarantine. Once the seal was removed, the architecture turned hostile. The passage beyond was a claustrophobic throat of stone, cut with agonizing precision into the bedrock. It was narrow, forcing the archaeologists to enter single file and low enough to demand a bowed head. There was no soot on the ceiling, no hearths, no debris from daily life. This was a space of transit, not habitation. The very shape of the tunnel dictated submission and hesitation. And then, the tunnel opened into the unknown. The flashlight beams cut through the darkness to reveal a staircase. It was a masterpiece of Neolithic craft steps worn smooth by generations of feet. But the staircase defied logic. It descended steeply only to terminate abruptly against a solid, flat wall of native stone. It was a staircase to nowhere. For days, the team debated the meaning. Was it unfinished? Was it ritualistic, a symbolic descent into the underworld? The wear patterns on the steps suggested thousands of journeys down and thousands of returns. But to where? The answer lay in the wall itself. It wasn't natural bedrock, it was a partition. Behind the facade lay one final, hermetically sealed chamber. They dismantled the wall stone by stone. The air inside had been still for 12,000 years. The chamber was small, barely a closet carved into the earth. It contained no gold, no tools, and no skeletons. It contained only skulls, but they were not placed in a pile of refuse. They were arranged, and they were wrong. The craniums were elongated, stretched backward into unnatural oblong shapes. Anthropologists identified it immediately as extreme artificial cranial deformation, the binding of an infant's head to permanently alter its biology. But the context was horrifying. In Neolithic culture, ancestors were venerated. Skulls were usually plastered, decorated, or kept in homes. These skulls had been stripped of their bodies, stripped of their identity, and locked behind a wall, at the bottom of a staircase, behind a sealed tunnel, under a layer of engineered asphalt. The sitewogs refer to them as not human in classification, not because they were aliens, but because the people of Göbekli Tepe had decided these individuals, whoever they were, could no longer be part of the human community. This discovery shatters the romantic image of the birthplace of civilization. We have long believed that society began with a handshake, a need to gather, worship, and share resources. But the sealed cave suggests a darker catalyst. The builders of Göbekli Tepe understood biological modification. They understood engineering. And most importantly, they understood how to weaponize architecture to restrict knowledge. This was not just a temple. It was a facility for managing things that terrified them. The staircase that leads to a wall was not a mistake. It was a boundary line, a warning. Civilization may have been built on cooperation, but it seems its foundations were poured to keep the monsters or the mistakes locked away in the dark. If you want to follow the excavation as it goes deeper, make sure to like and subscribe. The surface has been scratched, but the truth is buried deep.